Chapter 101 of Wild Wales. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Steve Gough. Wild Wales by George Borrow. Chapter 101. Swansea is called by the Welsh Abertawe, which signifies the mouth of the Tawe. Aber, as I have more than once had occasion to observe, signifies the place where a river enters into the sea or joins another. It is a Gaelic as well as a Cymric word, being found in the Gaelic names Aberdeen and Lochaber, and there is good reason for supposing that the word harbour is derived from it. Swansea or Swansea is a compound word of Scandinavian origin, which may mean either a river abounding with swans or the river of Swanr, the name of some northern adventurer who settled down at its mouth. The final E or A is the Norwegian A, which signifies a running water. It is of frequent occurrence in the names of rivers in Norway, and is often found, similarly modified, in those of other countries where the adventurous Norwegians formed settlements. Swansea first became a place of some importance shortly after the beginning of the 12th century. In the year 1108, the greater part of Flanders having been submerged by the sea, an immense number of Flemings came over to England, and entreated of Henry I, the king then occupying the throne, that he would all allot to them lands in which they might settle. The king sent them to various parts of Wales, which had been conquered by his barons or those of his predecessors. A considerable number occupied Swansea and the neighbourhood, but the far greater part went to Dyfed, generally but improperly called Pembroke, the south-eastern part of which, by far the most fertile, they entirely took possession of, leaving to the Welsh the rest, which is very mountainous and barren. I have already said that the people of Swansea stand out in broad distinctness from the Cymry, differing from them in stature, language, dress and manners, and wish to observe that the same may be said of the inhabitants of every part of Wales which the Flemings colonised in any considerable numbers. I found the accommodation very good at the Mackworth Arms. I passed the Saturday evening very agreeably, and slept well throughout the night. The next morning, to my great joy, I found my boots capitally repaired, awaiting me before my chamber door. Oh, the mighty effect of a little money! After breakfast I put them on, and as it was Sunday, went out in order to go to church. The streets were thronged with people. A new mayor had just been elected, and his worship, attended by a number of halbert and javelin men, was going to church too. I followed the procession, which moved with great dignity, and of course very slowly. The church had a high square tower, and looked a very fine edifice on the outside, and no less so within, for the nave was lofty with noble pillars on each side. I stood during the whole of the service, as did many others, for the congregation was so great that it was impossible to accommodate all with seats. The ritual was performed in a very satisfactory manner, and was followed by an excellent sermon. I am ashamed to say that I have forgotten the text, but I remember a good deal of the discourse. The preacher said amongst other things that the gospel was not preached in vain, and that he very much doubted whether a sermon was ever delivered which did not do some good. On the conclusion of the service I strolled about in order to see the town, and what pertained to it. The town is of considerable size, with some remarkable edifices, spacious and convenient quays, and a commodious harbour, into which the river Tawe, flowing from the north, empties itself. The town and harbour are overhung on the side of the east by a lofty green mountain, with a Welsh name, no doubt exceedingly appropriate, but which I regret to say has escaped my memory. After having seen all that I wished, I returned to my inn, and discharged all my obligations. I then departed, framing my course eastward towards England, having traversed Wales nearly from north to south. End of chapter 101. Chapter 102 of Wild Wales. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Steve Gough. Wild Wales by George Borrow. Chapter 102. It was about 2 o'clock of a dull and gloomy afternoon when I started from Abertawe, or Swansea, intending to stop at Neath, some 8 miles distant. As I passed again through the suburbs, I was struck with their length and the evidences of enterprise which they exhibited. Enterprise, however, chiefly connected with iron and coal, for almost every object looked awfully grimy. Crossing a bridge, I proceeded to the east up a broad and spacious valley, the eastern side of which was formed by russet-coloured hills, through a vista of which I could descry a range of tall blue mountains. As I proceeded, I sometimes passed pleasant groves and hedgerows, sometimes huge works. In this valley there was a singular mixture of nature and art, of the voices of birds and the clanking of chains, of the mists of heaven and the smoke of furnaces. I reached Llangollen, a small village halfway between Swansea and Neath, and without stopping continued my course, walking very fast. I had surmounted a hill and had nearly descended that side of it which looked towards the east, having on my left, that is to the north, a wooded height, when an extraordinary scene presented itself to my eyes. Somewhat to the south rose immense stacks of chimneys, surrounded by grimy, diabolical-looking buildings, in the neighbourhood of which were huge heaps of cinders and black rubbish. From the chimneys, notwithstanding it was Sunday, smoke was proceeding in volumes, choking the atmosphere all around. From this pandemonium, at the distance of about 1/4 of a mile to the south-west, upon a green meadow, stood, looking darkly grey, a ruin of vast size, with window-holes, towers, spires, and arches. Between it and the accursed pandemonium lay a horrid filthy place, part of which was swamp and part pool. The pool was black as soot, and the swamp of a disgusting leaden colour. Across this place of filth stretched a tramway leading seemingly from the abominable mansions to the ruin. So strange a scene I had never beheld in nature. Had it been on canvas, with the addition of a number of diabolical figures proceeding along the tramway, it might have stood for Sabbath in hell, devils proceeding to afternoon worship, and would have formed a picture worthy of the powerful but insane painter Jerome Boss. After standing for a considerable time staring at the strange spectacle, I proceeded. Presently meeting a lad, I asked him what was the name of the ruin. "The Abbey," he replied. "Neath Abbey?" said I. "Yes." Having often heard of this abbey, which in its day was one of the most famous in Wales, I determined to go and inspect it. It was with some difficulty that I found my way to it. It stood, as I have already observed, in a meadow, and was on almost every side surrounded by majestic hills. To give any clear description of this ruined pile would be impossible. The dilapidation is so great, dilapidation evidently less the effect of time than of awful violence, perhaps that of gunpowder. The southern is by far the most perfect portion of the building. There you see not only walls but roofs. Fronting you full south is a mass of masonry with 2 immense arches, other arches behind them. Entering, you find yourself beneath a vaulted roof, and passing on you come to an oblong square which may have been a church. An iron-barred window on your right enables you to look into a mighty vault, the roof of which is supported by beautiful pillars. Then, but I forbear to say more respecting these remains, for fear of stating what is incorrect, my stay amongst them having been exceedingly short. The Abbey of Neath was founded in the 12th century by Richard Grenfield, one of the followers of Robert Fitzhamon, who subjugated Glamorgan. Neath Abbey was a very wealthy one, the founder having endowed it with extensive tracts of fertile land along the banks of the rivers Neath and Tawy. In it the unfortunate Edward of Carnarvon sought refuge for a few days from the rage of his revolted barons, whilst his favourite, the equally unfortunate Spencer, endeavoured to find a covert amongst the thickets of the wood-covered hill to the north. When Richmond landed at Milford Haven to dispute the crown with Richard II, the then Abbot of Neath repaired to him and gave him his benediction, in requital for which the adventurer gave him his promise that in the event of his obtaining the crown he would found a college in Neath, which promise, however, after he had won the crown, he forgot to perform. The wily abbot, when he hastened to pay worship to what he justly conceived to be the rising sun, little dreamt that he was about to bless the future father of the terrible man doomed by Providence to plant the abomination of desolation in Neath Abbey, and in all the other nests of monkery throughout the land. Leaving the ruins, I proceeded towards Neath. The scenery soon became very beautiful. Not that I had left machinery altogether behind, for I presently came to a place where huge wheels were turning, and there was smoke and blast. But there was much that was rural and beautiful to be seen, something like park scenery, and then there were the mountains near and in the distance. I reached Neath at about 4:30, and took up my quarters at an inn which had been recommended to me by my friend the Boots at Swansea. End of chapter 102. Chapter 103 of Wild Wales. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Steve Gough. Wild Wales by George Borrow. Chapter 103. Neath is a place of some antiquity, for it can boast of the remains of a castle and is a corporate town. There is but little Welsh spoken in it. It is situated on the Neath, and exports vast quantities of coal and iron, of both of which there are rich mines in the neighbourhood. It derives its name from the river Neath or Neath, on which it stands. Neath or Neath is the same word as Neath, the name of a river in Scotland, and is in some degree connected with Nidda, the name of one in Germany. Neath in Wales signifies a dingle, and the word in its various forms has always something to do with lowness or inferiority of position. Amongst its forms are nether and neither. The term is well applied to the Glamorganshire river, which runs through dingles and under mountains. The Neath has its source in the mountains of Brecon, and enters the sea some little way below the town of Neath. On the Monday morning I resumed my journey, directing my course up the vale of Neath towards Merthyr Tydvil, distant about 24 miles. The weather was at first rainy, misty and miserable, but improved by degrees. I passed through a village which I was told was called Llangollen. Close to it were immense establishments of some kind. The scenery soon became exceedingly beautiful. Hills covered with wood to the tops were on either side of the dale. I passed an avenue leading somewhere through groves, and was presently overtaken and passed by hounds and a respectable-looking old huntsman on a black horse. A minute afterwards I caught a glimpse of an old red-brick mansion, nearly embosomed in the groves, from which proceeded a mighty cawing. Probably it belonged to the proprietor of the dogs, and certainly looked a very fit mansion for a Glamorganshire squire, justice of the peace, and keeper of a pack of hounds. I went on, the vale increasing in beauty. There was a considerable drawback, however. One of those detestable contrivances, a railroad, was on the farther side, along which trains were passing, rumbling and screaming. I saw a bridge on my right hand, with 5 or 6 low arches over the river, which were here full of shoals. Asked a woman the name of the bridge. "Pont Fawr ei Galw, sir." I was again amongst the real Welsh. This woman had no English. I passed by several remarkable mountains, both on the south and the northern side of the vale. Late in the afternoon I came to the eastern extremity of the vale and ascended a height. Shortly afterwards I reached Rhugos, a small village. Entering a public house I called for ale, and sat down amid some grimy fellows who said nothing to me, and to whom I said nothing. Their discourse was in Welsh and English. Of their Welsh I understood but little, for it was a strange corrupt jargon. In about half an hour after leaving this place I came to the beginning of a vast moor. It was now growing rather dusk, and I could see blazes here and there. Occasionally I heard horrid sounds. Came to Irvan, an enormous mining place with a spectral-looking chapel, doubtless a Methodist one. The street was crowded with rough, savage-looking men. "Is this the way to Merthyr Tydvil?" said I to one. "Yes," bawled the fellow at the utmost stretch of his voice. "Thank you," said I, taking off my hat and passing on. Forward I went, up hill and down dale. Night now set in. I passed a grove of trees and presently came to a collection of small houses at the bottom of a little hollow. Hearing a step near me, I stopped and said in Welsh, "How far to Merthyr Tydvil?" "Dim Cymraeg, sir," said a voice, seemingly that of a man. "Good night," said I, and without staying to put the question in English, I pushed on up an ascent, and was presently amongst trees. Heard for a long time the hooting of an owl, or rather the frantic hollo, appeared to pass by where the bird had its station, toiled up an acclivity, and when on the top stood still and looked around me. There was a glow on all sides in the heaven, except in the north-east quarter. Striding on, I saw a cottage on my left hand, and standing at the door the figure of a woman. "How far to Merthyr?" said I in Welsh. "Tair Merthyr, 3 miles, sir." Turning round a corner at the top of a hill, I saw blazes here and there in what appeared to be a glowing mountain in the south-east. I went towards it, down a descent which continued for a long, long way. So great was the light cast by the blazes and that wonderful glowing object, that I could distinctly see the little stones upon the road. After walking about half an hour, always going downwards, I saw a house on my left hand, and heard a noise of water opposite to it. It was a pistill. I went to it, drank greedily, and then hurried on. More and more blazes, and the glowing object looked more terrible than ever. It was now above me at some distance to the left, and I could see that it was an immense quantity of heated matter, like lava, occupying the upper and middle parts of a hill, and descending here and there almost to the bottom in a zigzag and tortuous manner. Between me and the hill of the burning object lay a deep ravine. After a time I came to a house, against the door of which a man was leaning. "What is all that burning stuff above, my friend?" "Dross from the iron forges, sir." I now perceived a valley below me, full of lights, and descending reached houses and a tramway. I had blazes now all around me. I went through a filthy slough, over a bridge and up a street, from which dirty lanes branched off on either side, past throngs of savage-looking people talking clamorously, shrank from addressing any of them, and finally, undirected, found myself before the Castle Inn at Merthyr Tydvil. End of chapter 103. Chapter 104 of Wild Wales. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Steve Gough. Wild Wales by George Borrow. Chapter 104. Merthyr Tydvil is situated in a broad valley through which roll the waters of the Taff. It was till late an inconsiderable village, but is at present the greatest mining place in Britain, and may be called with much propriety the capital of the iron and coal. It bears the name of Merthyr Tydvil, which signifies the martyr Tydvil, because in the old time a Christian British princess was slain in the locality which it occupies. Tydvil was the daughter of Brychan, Prince of Brecon, surnamed Brycheiniawg, or the Breconian, who flourished in the 5th century and was a contemporary of Hengist. He was a man full of Christian zeal and a great preacher of the gospel, and gave his children, of which he had many, both male and female, by various wives, an education which he hoped would not only make them Christians, but enable them to preach the gospel to their countrymen. They proved themselves worthy of his care, all of them without one exception becoming exemplary Christians and useful preachers. In his latter days he retired to a hermitage in Glamorganshire near the Taff, and passed his time in devotion, receiving occasionally visits from his children. Once, when he and several of them, amongst whom was Tydvil, were engaged in prayer, a band of heathen Saxons rushed in upon them and slew Tydvil with 3 of her brothers. Ever since that time the place has borne the name of Martyr Tydvil. The Taff, which runs to the south of Merthyr, comes down from Breconshire and enters the Bristol Channel at Cardiff, a place the name of which in English is the City of the Taff. It is one of the most beautiful of rivers, but is not navigable on account of its numerous shallows. The only service which it renders to commerce is feeding a canal which extends from Merthyr to Cardiff. It is surprising how similar many of the Welsh rivers are in name. Taff, Towie, Towie, Tydvil and Duffy differ but very little in sound. Taff and Tydvil have both the same meaning, namely a tendency to spread out. The other names, though probably expressive of the properties or peculiarities of the streams to which they respectively belong, I know not how to translate. The morning of the 14th was very fine. After breakfast I went to see the Cyfarfod Fawr ironworks, generally considered to be the great wonder of the place. After some slight demur, I obtained permission from the superintendent to inspect them. I was attended by an intelligent mechanic. What shall I say about Cyfarfod Fawr? I had best say but very little. I saw enormous furnaces. I saw streams of molten metal. I saw a long ductile piece of red-hot iron being operated upon. I saw millions of sparks flying about. I saw an immense wheel impelled round with frightful velocity by a steam engine of 240 horsepower, and I heard all kinds of dreadful sounds. The general effect was stunning. These works belonged to the Crauchetes, a family distinguished by a strange kind of eccentricity, but also by genius and enterprising spirit, and by such a strict feeling of honour that it is a common saying that the word of any one of them is as good as the bond of other people. After seeing the Cyfarfod, I roamed about, making general observations. The mountain of Dros, which had startled me on the preceding night with its terrific glare, and which stands to the northwest of the town, looked now nothing more than an immense dark heap of cinders. It is only when the shades of night have settled down that the fire within manifests itself, making the hill appear an immense glowing mass. All the hills around the town, some of which are very high, have a scorched and blackened look. An old Anglesey bard, rather given to bombast, wishing to extol the abundant cheer of his native isle, said, "The hills of Ireland are blackened by the smoke from the kitchens of Mona." With much more propriety might a bard of the banks of the Taff, who would wish to apologise for the rather smutty appearance of his native vale, exclaim, "The hills around the Taff, once so green, are blackened by the smoke from the chimneys of Merthyr." The town is large and populous. The inhabitants for the most part are Welsh, and Welsh is the language generally spoken, though all have some knowledge of English. The houses are in general low and mean and built of rough grey stone. Merthyr, however, can show several remarkable edifices, though of a gloomy, horrid, satanic character. There is the Hall of the Iron, with its arches, from whence proceeds incessantly a thundering noise of hammers. Then there is an edifice at the foot of a mountain, halfway up the side of which is a blasted forest, and on the top an enormous crag. A truly wonderful edifice. It is such as Boss would have imagined had he wanted to paint the palace of Satan. There it stands, a house of reddish brick with a slate roof, 4 horrid black towers behind, 2 of them belching forth smoke and flame from their tops, holes like pigeon-holes here and there, 2 immense white chimneys standing by themselves. What edifice can that be of such strange mad details? I ought to have put that question to someone in Tydvil, but did not, though I stood staring at the diabolical structure with my mouth open. It is of no use putting the question to myself here. After strolling about for some 2 hours with my hands in my pockets, I returned to my inn, called for a glass of ale, paid my reckoning, flung my satchel over my shoulder, and departed. End of chapter 104. Chapter 105 of Wild Wales. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Steve Gough. Wild Wales by George Borrow. Chapter 105. I left Merthyr about 12 o'clock for Caerfili. My course lay along the valley to the south-east. I passed a large village called Troed or the foot of the slope. from its being at the foot of a lofty elevation which stands on the left-hand side of the road, and was speeding onward fast with the Taff some distance on my right, when I saw a strange-looking woman advancing towards me. She seemed between 40 and 50, was barefooted and bareheaded, with grizzled hair hanging in elf locks, and was dressed in rags and tatters. When about 10 yards from me she pitched forward, gave 3 or 4 grotesque tumbles, heels over head, then standing bolt upright about a yard before me, raised her right arm and shouted in a most discordant voice, "Give me an alms, for the glory of God!" I stood quite confounded. Presently, however, recovering myself, I said, "I really don't think it would be for the glory of God to give you alms." "Ye don't? Then biad an tavron. However, I'll give you a chance yet. Am I to get my alms or not?" "Before I give you alms, I must know something about you. Who are you?" "Who am I? Who should I be but Johanna Colgan, a bedivilled woman from the county of Limerick." "And how did you become a bedevilled?" "Because a woman something like myself said an evil prayer of me for not giving her an alms, which prayer I have at my tongue's end, and unless I get my alms will say of you. So for your own sake, honey, give me my alms and let me go on my way." "Oh, I am not to be frightened by evil prayers. I shall give you nothing till I hear all about you." "And if I tell ye all about me, will ye give me an alms?" "Well, I have no objection to give you something if you tell me your story." "Will ye give me a decent alms?" "Oh, you must leave the amount to my free will and pleasure. I shall give you what I think fit." "Well, so ye shall, honey, and I make no doubt that ye will give me a decent alms, for I like the look of ye, and I know ye to be an Irishman half a mile off. Only 4 years ago, instead of being a bedivilled woman tumbling about the world, I was as quiet and respectable a widow as could be found in the county of Limerick. I had a nice little farm in an icy rint, horses, cows, pigs and servants, and, what was better than all, a couple of fine sons who were a help and comfort to me. But my black day was not far off. I was a mighty charitable woman, and always willing to give to the backers and other beggars that came about. Every morning before I opened my door I got ready the alms which I intended to give away in the course of the day to those who should ask for them, and I made so good a preparation that though plenty of cripples and other unfortunates wandering through the world came to me every day, part of the alms was sure to remain upon my hands every night when I closed my door. The alms which I gave away consisted of meal, and I had always a number of small measures of meal standing ready on a board, one of which I used to empty into the poke of every backer or unfortunate who used to place himself at the side of my door and cry out Ave Maria, or in the name of God. Well, one morning I sat within my door spinning, with a little bit of Colleen beside me, who waited upon me as servant. My measures of meal were all ready for the unfortunates who should come, filled with all the meal in the house, for there was no meal in the house save what was in those measures. Divil a particle, the whole stock being exhausted, though by evening I expected plenty more, my 2 sons being gone to the Ballybetag, which was 7 miles distant, for a fresh supply and for other things. Well, I sat within my door spinning, with my servant by my side to wait upon me, and my measures of meal ready for the unfortunates who might come to ask for alms. There I sat, quite proud, and more happy than I have ever felt in my life before, and the unfortunates began to make their appearance. First came a backer on crutches, then came a woman with a white swelling, then came an individual who had nothing at all the matter with him, and was only a poor unfortunate wandering about the world. Then came a far cake, a dark man, who was led about by a gossoon, and after him a simply, and after the simpleton somebody else as much or more unfortunate. And as the afflicted people arrived and placed themselves by the side of the door and said Ave Maria, or in the name of God, or crossed their arms, or looked down upon the ground, each according to his practice, I got up and emptied my measure of meal into his poke, or whatever he carried about with him for receiving the alms which might be given to him, and my measures of meal began to be emptied fast, for it seemed that upon that day, when I happened to be particularly short of meal, all the unfortunates of the county of Limerick had conspired together to come to ask me for alms. At last every measure of meal was emptied, and there I sat in my house with nothing to give away, provided an unfortunate should come. Says I to the colleen, what shall I do provided any more come, for all the meal is gone, and there will be no more before the boys come home at night from the Ballybetag. says the colleen. If any more come, can't ye give them something else? Says I, it has always been my practice to give in meal, and loath should I be to alter it, for if once I begin to give away other things, I may give away all I have. Says the colleen, let's hope no one else will come. There have been 13 of them already. Scarcely had she said these words when a monstrous woman, half naked and with a long staff in her hand, on the top of which was a cross, made her appearance, and placing herself right before the door, cried out so that you might have heard her for a mile, "Give me an alms for the glory of God." Good woman, says I to her, you will be kind enough to excuse me. All the preparation I had made for alms has been given away, for I have relieved 13 unfortunates this blessed morning. So may the Virgin help ye, good woman. Give me an alms, said the bean vor, with a louder voice than before, or it will be worse for you. You must excuse me, good mistress, says I, but I have no more meal in the house. Those 13 measures which you see there empty were full this morning, for what was in them I have given away to unfortunates. So the Virgin and Child help you. Do you choose to give me an alms? She shrieked, so that you might have heard her to Londonderry. If ye have no meal, give me something else. You must excuse me, good lady, says I. It is my custom to give alms in meal and in nothing else. I have none in the house now, but if ye come on the morrow, ye shall have a triple measure. In the meanwhile, may the Virgin Child and the Holy Trinity assist ye. Thereupon she looked at me fixedly for a moment, and then said, not in a loud voice, but in a low, half-whispered way, which was 10 times more deadly, Biad an Tydvil gan sholas duit a bien shilach. Then turning from the door, she went away with long strides. Now, honey, can you tell me the meaning of those words? They mean, said I, unless I am much mistaken, may the mass never comfort ye, you dirty queen. Oh, Heen, that's the meaning of them, sure enough. They are cramped words, but I guessed that was the meaning, or something of the kind. Well, after hearing the evil prayer, I sat for a minute or two quite stunned. At length, recovering myself a bit, I said to the colleen, get up and run after the woman and tell her to come back and cross the prayer. I meant by crossing that she should call it back, or do something that would take the venom out of it. Well, the colleen was rather loath to go, for she was a bit scared herself, but on my beseeching her, she got up and ran after the woman, and being rather swift of foot, at last, though with much difficulty, overtook her, and begged her to come back and cross the prayer, but the devil of a woman would do no such thing. And when the colleen persisted, she told her that if she didn't go back, she would say an evil prayer over her too. So the colleen left her and came back crying and frighted. All the rest of the day I remained sitting on the stool speechless, thinking of the prayer which the woman had said, and wishing I had given her everything I had in the world, rather than she should have said it. At night came home the boys and found their mother sitting on the stool like one stupefied. "What's the matter with you, mother?" they said. "Get up and help us unpack. We have brought home plenty of things in the car, and among others a whole ball of meal." "You might as well have left it behind you," said I. "This morning a single measure of meal would have been to me of all the assistance in the world, but I question now if I shall ever want meal again." They asked me what had happened to me, and after some time I told them how a monstrous woman had been to me, and had said an evil prayer over me, because having no meal in the house I had not given her an alms. "Come, mother," said they, "get up and help us to unload. Never mind the prayer of the monstrous woman, it is all nonsense." Well, I got up and helped them to unload, and cooked them a bit, and sat down with them and tried to be merry, but felt that I was no longer the woman that I was. The next day I didn't seem to care what became of me, or how matters went, and though there was now plenty of meal in the house, not a measure did I fill with it to give away in the shape of alms, and when the backers and the leprous women and the dark men and the other unfortunates placed themselves at the side of the door and gave me to understand that they wanted alms, each in his or her particular manner, divil an alms did I give them, but let them stand and took no heed of them, so that at last they took themselves off, grumbling and cursing. And little did I care for their grumblings and cursings. 2 days before I wouldn't have had an unfortunate grumble at me or curse me for all the riches below the sun, but now their grumblings and cursings didn't give me the slightest uneasiness, for I had an evil prayer spoken against me in the Shanna Gaeli by the monstrous woman, and I knew that I was blighted in this world and the next. In a little time I ceased to pay any heed to the farming business or to the affairs of the house, so that my sons had no comfort in their home. And I took to drink, and induced my eldest son to take to drink too. My youngest son, however, did not take to drink, but conducted himself well, and toiled and laboured like a horse, and often begged me and his brother to consider what we were about, and not to go on in a way that would bring us all to ruin. But I paid no regard to what he said, and his brother followed my example, so that at last, seeing things were getting worse every day, and that we should soon be turned out of house and home, for no rent was paid, every penny that could be got being consumed in waste, he bade us farewell, and went and listed for a sodger. But if matters were bad enough before he went away, they became much worse after. For now, when the unfortunates came to the door for alms, instead of letting them stand in pace till they were tired and took themselves off, I would mock them and point at them, and twit them with their sores and other misfortunes, and not infrequently I would fling scalding water over them, that would send them howling and honing away, till at last there was not an unfortunate but feared to come within a mile of my door. Moreover, I began to misconduct myself at chapel, more especially at the Eifrion or Mass. For no sooner was the bell rung and the holy corpus raised, than I would shout and hurrah, and go tumbling and toppling along the floor before the holy body, as I just now tumbled along the road before you, so that the people were scandalized and would take me by the shoulders and turn me out of doors, and began to talk of ducking me in the bog. The priest of the parish, however, took my part, saying that I ought not to be persecuted, for that I was not accountable for what I did, being a possessed person, and under the influence of devils. These, however, said he, I'll soon cast out from her, and then the woman will be a holy creature, much better than ever she was before. A very learned man was Father Hogan, especially in casting out devils, and a portly, good-looking man too, only he had a large Rubicon nose, which people said he got by making over free with the creature in secret. I had often looked at the nose when the devil was upon me, and felt an inclination to seize hold of it, just to see how it felt. Well, he had me to his house several times, and there he put holy cloths upon me, and tied holy images to me, and read to me out of holy books, and sprinkled holy water over me, and put questions to me, and at last was so pleased with the answers I gave him, that he preached a sermon about me in the chapel, in which he said that he had cast 6 of my devils out of me, and should cast out the 7th, which was the last, by the next Sabbath, and then should present me to the folks of the chapel as pure a vessel as the Blessed Mary herself, and that I was destined to accomplish great things, and to be a mighty instrument in the hands of the Holy Church, for that he intended to write a book about me, describing the miracle he had performed in casting the 7 devils out of me, which he should get printed at the printing press of the Blessed Columba, and should send me through all Ireland, to sell the copies, the profits of which would go towards the support of the Holy Society for casting out unclean spirits, to which he himself belonged. Well, the people showed that they were pleased by a loud shout, and went away longing for the next Sunday, when I was to be presented to them without a devil in me. 5 times the next week did I go to the priest's house to be read to, and be sprinkled, and have cloths put upon me, in order that the work of casting out the last devil, which it seemed was stronger than all the rest, might be made smooth and easy. And on the Saturday I came to have the last devil cast out, and found his reverence in full canonicals, seated in his easy chair. "Daughter," said he when he saw me, "the work is nearly over. Now kneel down before me, and I will make the sign of the cross over your forehead, and then you will feel the last and strongest of the devils, which have so long possessed ye, go out of ye through your eyes, as I expect you will say to the people assembled in the chapel to-morrow." So I put myself on my knees before his reverence, who, after muttering something to himself either in Latin or Shanna Gaeli, I believe it was Latin, said, "Look me in the face, daughter." Well, I looked his reverence in the face, and there I saw his nose looking so large, red, and inviting, that I could not resist the temptation, and before his reverence could make the sign of the cross, which doubtless would have driven the devil out of me, I made a spring at it, and seizing hold of it with forefinger and thumb, pulled hard at it. Hot and unctuous did it feel. Oh, the yell that his reverence gave! However, I did not let go my hold, but kept pulling at the nose, till at last, to avoid the torment, his reverence came tumbling down upon me, causing me by his weight to fall back upon the floor. At the yell which he gave, and at the noise of the fall, in came rushing his reverence's housekeeper and stable boy, who, seeing me down on the floor, his reverence upon me, and my hand holding his reverence's nose, for I felt loath to let it go, they remained in astonishment and suspense. When his reverence, however, begged them for the Virgin's sake to separate him from the devil of a woman, they ran forward, and having with some difficulty freed his reverence's nose from my hand, they helped him up. The first thing that his reverence did on being placed on his legs was to make for a horsewhip, which stood in one corner of the room, but I, guessing how he meant to use it, sprang up from the floor, and before he could make a cut at me, ran out of the room and hasted home. The next day, when all the people for 20 miles round met in the chapel, in the expectation of seeing me presented to them a purified and holy woman, and hearing from my mouth the account of the miracle which his reverence had performed, his reverence made his appearance in the pulpit, with a dale of gold bater's leaf on his nose, and from the pulpit he told the people how I had used him, showing them the gold bater's leaf on his feature, as testimony of the truth of his words, finishing by saying that if at first there were 7 devils, there were now 7 times 7 within me. Well, when the people heard the story and saw his nose with the bater's leaf upon it, they at first began to laugh. But when he appealed to their consciences and asked them if such was a fitting treatment for a priest, they said it was not, and that if he could only but curse me, they would soon do him justice upon me. His reverence then cursed by book, bell and candle, and the people setting off from the chapel came in a crowd to the house where I lived to wreak vengeance upon me. Overtaking my son by the way, who was coming home in a state of intoxication, they bait him within an inch of his life and left him senseless on the ground, and no doubt would have served me much worse, only seeing them coming and guessing what they came about, though I was a bit intoxicated myself, I escaped by the back of the house out into the bog, where I hid myself amidst a copse of hazels. The people coming to the house and not finding me there, broke and destroyed every bit of furniture, and would have pulled the house down or set fire to it, had not an individual among them cried out that doing so would be of no use, for the house did not belong to me, and that destroying it would merely be an injury to the next tenant. So the people, after breaking my furniture and ill-treating 2 or 3 dumb beasts, which happened not to have been made away with, went away, and in the dead of night I returned to the house, where I found my son, who had just crawled home, covered with bruises. We hadn't, however, a home long, for the agents of the landlord came to seize the rent, took all they could find, and turned us out upon the wide world. Myself and son wandered together for an hour or 2, and having a quarrel with each other we parted, he going one way and I another. Some little time after I heard he was transported. As for myself, I thought I might as well take a leaf out of the woman's book, who had been the ruin of me. So I went about bidding people give me alms for the glory of God, and threatening those who gave me nothing that the mass should never comfort them. It's a dreadful curse, that, honey, and I would advise people to avoid it, even though they give away all they have. If you have no comfort in the mass, you will have comfort in nothing else. Look at me, I have no comfort in the mass, for as soon as the priest's bell rings, I shouts and hurrays and performs tumblings before the blessed corpus, getting myself kicked out of chapel, and as little comfort as I have in the mass have I in other things which should be a comfort to me. I have 2 sons who ought to be the greatest comfort to me, but are they so? We'll see. One is transported, and of course is no comfort to me at all. The other is a sodger. Is he comfort to me? Not a bit. A month ago, when I was travelling through the black north, tumbling and toppling about and threatening people with my prayer unless they gave me alms, a woman who knew me told me he was with his regiment in Cardiff, here in Wales, whereupon I determined to go and see him, and crossing the water got into England, from whence I walked to Cardiff, asking alms of the English in the common English way, and of the Irish, and ye are the first Irish I have met, in the way in which I asked them of you. But when I got to Cardiff, did I see my son? I did not, for the day before he had sailed with his regiment to a place 10,000 miles away. so I shall never see his face again, nor derive comfort from him. Oh, if there's no comfort from the Mass, there's no comfort from anything else, and he who has the evil prayer in the Shanagaili breathed upon him will have no comfort from the Mass. Now, honey, ye have heard the story of Johanna Colgan, the bedivilled woman. Give her now a decent alms and let her go." "Would you consider sixpence a decent alms?" "I would. If you give me sixpence, I will not say my prayer over ye." "Would you give me a blessing?" "I would not. A bedivilled woman has no blessing to give." "Surely if you are able to ask people to give you alms for the glory of God, you are able to give a blessing." "Botheration, are you going to give me sixpence?" "No." "Here's a shilling for you. Take it and go in peace." "There's no peace in me," said Johanna Colgan, taking the money. "What did the monstrous female say to me? Biad an Tyfrian gan sholas duita bin shalak. This is my pace. Hooray, hooray!" Then giving 2 or 3 grotesque topples, she hurried away in the direction of Merthyr Tydvil. End of chapter 105. Chapter 106 of Wild Wales. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Steve Gough. Wild Wales by George Borrow. Chapter 106. As I proceeded on my way, the scenery to the south, on the further side of the river, became surprisingly beautiful. On that side noble hills met the view, green fields and majestic woods, the latter brown, it is true, for their leaves were gone, but not the less majestic for being brown. Here and there were white farmhouses. One of them, which I was told was called Glas, was a truly lovely little place. It stood on the side of a green hill, with a noble forest above it, and put me wonderfully in mind of the hunting lodge which Ifor Hael allotted as a retreat to Ab Gwilym and Morfudd, when they fled to him from Cardigan to avoid the rage of the Baw Bach, and whose charming appearance made him say to his love, "More bliss for us our fate propounds on Taff's green banks than Tyvi's bounds." On I wandered. After some time the valley assumed the form of an immense basin. Enormous mountains composed its sides. In the middle rose hills of some altitude, but completely overcrowned by the mountains around. These hills exhibited pleasant enclosures, and were beautifully dotted with white farmhouses. Down below meandered the Taff, its reaches shining with a silver-like splendour. The whole together formed an exquisite picture, in which there was much sublimity, much still quiet life, and not a little of fantastic fairy loveliness. The sun was hastening towards the west as I passed a little cascade on the left, the waters of which, after running under the road, tumbled down a gully into the river. Shortly afterwards, meeting a man, I asked him how far it was to Caerfili. "When you come to the Quaker's Yard, which is a little way further on, you will be 7 miles from Caerfili." "What is the Quaker's Yard?" "A place where the people called Quakers bury their dead." "Is there a village near it?" "There is, and the village is called by the same name." "Are there any Quakers in it?" "Not one, nor in the neighbourhood, but there are some, I believe, in Cardiff." "Why do they bury their dead there?" "You should ask them, not me. I know nothing about them, and don't want. They are a bad set of people." "Did they ever do you any harm?" "Can't say that they did. Indeed, I never saw one in the whole of my life." "Then why do you call them bad?" "Because everybody says they are." "Not everybody. I don't. I have always found them the salt of the earth." "Then it is the salt that has lost its savour. But perhaps you are one of them." "No, I belong to the Church of England." "Oh, you do? Then good night to you. I am a Methodist. I thought at first that you were one of our ministers, and had hoped to hear from you something profitable and conducive to salvation, but—" "Well, so you shall. Never speak ill of people of whom you know nothing. If that isn't a saying conducive to salvation, I know not what is. Good evening to you." I soon reached the village. Singular enough, the people of the very first house at which I inquired about the Quaker's yard were entrusted with the care of it. On my expressing a wish to see it, a young woman took down a key, and said that if I should follow her, she would show it me. The Quaker's burial place is situated on a little peninsula or tongue of land, having a brook on its eastern and northern sides, and on its western the Taff. It is a little oblong yard with low walls, partly overhung with ivy. The entrance is a porch to the south. The Quakers are no friends to tombstones, and the only visible evidence that this was a place of burial was a single flagstone with a half obliterated inscription, which with some difficulty I deciphered, and was as follows: "To the memory of Thomas Edmonds, who died April the 9th, 1802, aged 60 years, and of Mary Edmonds, who died January the 4th, 1810, aged 70. The beams of the descending sun gilded the Quaker's burial ground as I trod its precincts. A lovely resting place looked that little oblong yard on the peninsula by the confluence of the waters, and quite in keeping with the character of the quiet Christian people who sleep within it. The Quakers have for some time past been a decaying sect, but they have done good work in their day, and when they are extinct they are not destined to be soon forgotten. Soon forgotten! How should a sect ever be forgotten, to which have belonged three such men as George Fox, William Penn, and Joseph Gurney? Shortly after I left the Quaker's yard the sun went down, and twilight settled upon the earth. Pursuing my course I reached some woodlands, and on inquiring of a man whom I saw standing at the door of a cottage the name of the district, was told that it was called Ystrad Mynach, the Monk's Strath or Valley. This name it probably acquired from having belonged in times of old to some monkish establishment. The moon now arose, and the night was delightful. As I wandered along I heard again the same wild noise which I had heard the night before on the other side of Merthyr Tydvil, the cry of the owl afar off in the woodlands. Oh, that strange bird! Oh, that strange cry! The Welsh, as I have said on a former occasion, call the owl Dylluan. Amongst the cowydds of Ab Gwilym there is one to the Dylluan. It is full of abuse against the bird, with whom the poet is very angry for having with its cry frightened Morfudd back, who was coming to the wood to keep an assignation with him, but not a little of this abuse is wonderfully expressive and truthful. He calls the owl a grey thief, the haunter of the ivy bush, the chick of the oak, a blinking-eyed witch, greedy of mice, with a visage like a bald forehead of a big ram, or the dirty face of an old abbess, which bears no little resemblance to the chine of an ape. Of its cry he says that it is as great a torment as an agonizing recollection, a cold shrill laugh from the midst of a kettle of ice, the rattling of sea pebbles in an old sheepskin, on which account many call the owl the hag of the Rhugylgroen. The Rhugylgroen, it will be as well to observe, is a dry sheepskin containing a number of pebbles, and is used as a rattle for frightening crows. The likening the visage of the owl to the dirty face of an old abbess is capital, and the likening of the cry of the noise of the Rhugylgroen is anything but unfortunate, for after all what does the voice of the owl so much resemble as a diabolical rattle? I'm sure I don't know. Reader, do you? I reached Caerfili about 7 o'clock, and went to the Boar's Head, near the ruins of a stupendous castle on which the beams of the moon were falling. End of chapter 106. Chapter 107 of Wild Wales. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Steve Gough. Wild Wales by George Borrow. Chapter 107. I slept well during the night. In the morning, after breakfast, I went to see the castle, of which I was conducted by a woman who was entrusted with its care. It stands on the eastern side of the little town, and is a truly enormous structure, which brought to my recollection a saying of our great Johnson, to be found in the account of his journey to the Western Islands, namely, that for all the castles which he had seen beyond the Tweed, the ruins yet remaining of some one of those which the English built in Wales would find materials. The original founder was one John de Bryse, a powerful Norman, who married the daughter of Llywelyn ap Iorwerth, the son-in-law of King John, and the most warlike of all the Welsh princes, whose exploits, and particularly a victory which he obtained over his father-in-law, with whom he was always at war, have been immortalised by the great war bard, Dafydd Benfras. It is one of the strongholds which belonged to the Spencers, and served for a short time as a retreat to the unfortunate Edward II. It was ruined by Cromwell, the grand foe of the baronial castles of Britain, but not in so thorough and sweeping a manner as to leave it a mere heap of stones. There is a noble entrance porch fronting the west, a spacious courtyard, a grand banqueting room, a corridor of vast length, several lofty towers, a chapel, a sally-port, a guard-room, and a strange underground vaulted place called the Mint, in which Caerfili's barons once coined money, and in which the furnaces still exist which were used for melting metal. The name Caerfili is said to signify the castle of haste, and to have been bestowed on the pile because it was built in a hurry. Caerfili, however, was never built in a hurry, as the remains show. Moreover, the Welsh word for haste is not vil, but vrwst. Vil means a scudding or darting through the air, which can have nothing to do with the building of a castle. Caerfili signifies Philip's city, and was called so after one Philip a saint. It no more means the castle of haste than Tintagel in Cornwall signifies the castle of guile, as the learned have said it does, for Tintagel simply means the house in the gill of the hill, a term admirably descriptive of the situation of the building. I started from Caerfili at 11 for Newport, distant about 17 miles. Passing through a toll gate, I ascended an acclivity, from the top of which I obtained a full view of the castle, looking stern, dark, and majestic. Descending the hill, I came to a bridge over a river called the Rhymni or Rumney, much celebrated in Welsh and English song, thence to Pentref Betws, or the river of the bead house, doubtless so called from its having contained in old times a house in which pilgrims might tell their beads. The scenery soon became very beautiful. Its beauty, however, was to a certain extent marred by a horrid black object, a huge coal work, the chimneys of which were belching forth smoke of the densest description. "Whom does that work belong to?" said I to a man nearly as black as a chimney sweep. "Who does it belong to? Why, to Sir Charles." "Do you mean Sir Charles Morgan?" "I don't know. I only know that it belongs to Sir Charles, the kindest-hearted and richest man in Wales, and in England too." Passing some cottages, I heard a group of children speaking English, asked an intelligent-looking girl if she could speak Welsh. "Yes," said she, "I can speak it, but not very well." There is not much Welsh spoken by the children hereabout. The old folks hold more to it. I saw again the Rhymni River, and crossed it by a bridge. The river here was filthy and turbid, owing of course to its having received the foul drainings of the neighbouring coal works. Shortly afterwards I emerged from the cwm, or valley, of the Rhymni, and entered upon a fertile and tolerably level district. Passed by Llanawst and Machen. The day, which had been very fine now, became dark and gloomy. Suddenly, as I was descending a slope, a brilliant party, consisting of 4 young ladies in riding habits, a youthful cavalier, and a servant in splendid livery, all on noble horses, swept past me at full gallop down the hill. Almost immediately afterwards, seeing a road mender who was standing holding his cap in his hand, which he had no doubt just reverently doffed, I said in Welsh, "Who are those ladies?" "Merched Sir Charles, the daughters of Sir Charles," he replied. "And is the gentleman their brother?" "No, the brother is in the Crim, fighting with the Rwsiaid. I don't know who yon gentleman be." "Where does Sir Charles live?" "Down in the Dyffryn, not far from Basallaig." "If I were to go and see him," I said, "do you think he would give me a cup of ale?" "I dare say he would. He has given me one many a time." I soon reached Basallaig, a pleasant village standing in a valley and nearly surrounded by the groves of Sir Charles Morgan. Seeing a decent public house, I said to myself, I think I shall step in and have my ale here, and not go running after Sir Charles, whom perhaps after all I shouldn't find at home. So I went in and called for a pint of ale. Over my ale I trifled for about half an hour, then paying my groat, I got up and set off for Newport, in the midst of a thick mist which had suddenly come on, and which speedily wetted me nearly to the skin. I reached Newport at about 4:30, and put up at a large and handsome inn called the King's Head. During dinner the waiter, unasked, related to me his history. He was a short, thick fellow of about 40, with a very disturbed and frightened expression of countenance. He said that he was a native of Brummagem, and had lived very happily at an inn there as waiter, but at length had allowed himself to be spirited away to an establishment high up in Wales, amidst the scenery. That very few visitors came to the establishment, which was in a place so awfully lonesome that he soon became hipped, and was more than once half in a mind to fling himself into a river which ran before the door, and moan dismally. That at last he thought his best plan would be to decamp, and accordingly took French leave early one morning. That after many frights and much fatigue he had found himself at Newport, and taken service at the King's Head, but did not feel comfortable, and was frequently visited at night by dreadful dreams. That he should take the first opportunity of getting to Brummagem, though he was afraid that he should not be able to get into his former place, owing to his ungrateful behaviour. He then uttered a rather eloquent eulogium on the beauties of the Black Capital, and wound up all by saying that he would rather be a brazier's dog at Brummagem than head waiter at the best establishment in Wales. After dinner I took up a newspaper and found in it an account of the Battle of Inkerman, which appeared to have been fought on the 5th of November, the very day on which I had ascended Plynlimmon. I was sorry to find that my countrymen had suffered dreadfully, and would have been utterly destroyed but for the opportune arrival of the French. In my childhood, said I, the Russians used to help us against the French. Now the French help us against the Russians. Who knows but before I die I may see the Russians helping the French against us. End of chapter 107. Chapter 108 of Wild Wales. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Steve Gough. Wild Wales by George Borrow. Chapter 108. Newport is a large town in Monmouthshire, and had once walls and a castle. It is called in Welsh Casnewydd ar Wysg, or the New Castle upon the Usk. It stands some miles below Caerfili ar Wysg, and was probably built when that place, at one time one of the most considerable towns in Britain, began to fall into decay. The Wysg or Usk has its source among some wild hills in the southwest of Breconshire, and after absorbing several smaller streams, amongst which is the Hondy, at the mouth of which Brecon stands, which on that account is called in Welsh Aberhondy, and traversing the whole of Monmouthshire, enters the Bristol Channel near Newport, to which place vessels of considerable burden can ascend. Wysg or Usk is an ancient British word, signifying water, and is the same as the Irish word uisg, or whisky, for whisky, though generally serving to denote a spirituous liquor in great vogue amongst the Irish, means simply water. The proper term for the spirit is whiskabar, literally aqua vitae, but the compound being abbreviated by the English, who have always been notorious for their habit of clipping words, one of the strongest of spirits is now generally denominated by a word which is properly expressive of the simple element water. Monmouthshire is at present considered an English county, though certainly with little reason, for it not only stands on the western side of the Wye, but the names of almost all its parishes are Welsh, and many thousands of its population still speak the Welsh language. It is called in Welsh Sir or Shire Fynwy, and takes its name from the town Mynwy or Monmouth, which receives its own appellation from the river Mynwy or Minnow, on which it stands. There is a river of much the same name, not in Macedon, but in the peninsula, namely the Minho, which probably got its denomination from that race cognate to the Cymry, the Gael, who were the first colonisers of the peninsula, and whose generic name yet stares us in the face and salutes our ears in the words Galicia and Portugal. I left Newport at about 10 o'clock on the 16th. The roads were very wet, there having been a deluge of rain during the night. The morning was a regular November one, dull and gloomy. Desirous of knowing whereabouts in these parts the Welsh language ceased, I interrogated several people whom I met. First spoke to Esther Williams. She told me she came from Penno, some miles further on, that she could speak Welsh, and that indeed all the people could for at least 8 miles to the east of Newport. This latter assertion of hers was, however, anything but corroborated by a young woman with a pitcher on her head, whom I shortly afterwards met, for she informed me that she could speak no Welsh, and that for one who could speak it, from where I was to the place where it ceased altogether, there were 10 who could not. I believe the real fact is that about half the people for 7 or 8 miles to the east of Newport speak Welsh, more or less, as about half those whom I met and addressed in Welsh answered me in that tongue. Passed through Pennow or Penhow, a small village. The scenery in the neighbourhood of this place is highly interesting. To the northwest at some distance is Merthyr, a sharp pointed blue mountain. To the southeast on the right, much nearer, are 2 beautiful green hills, the lowest prettily wooded, and having its top a fair white mansion called Penhow Castle, which belongs to a family of the name of Cave. Thence to Llanvaches, a pretty little village. When I was about the middle of this place I heard an odd sound, something like a note of recognition, which attracted my attention to an object very near to me, from which it seemed to proceed, and which was coming from the direction in which I was going. It was the figure seemingly of a female, wrapped in a coarse blue cloak, the feet bare, and the legs bare also, nearly up to the knee, both terribly splashed with the slush of the road. The head was surmounted by a kind of hood, which just permitted me to see coarse red hair, a broad face, grey eyes, a snub nose, blubber lips, and great white teeth. The eyes were staring intently at me. I stopped and stared too, and at last thought I recognised the features of the uncouth girl I had seen on the green near Chepstow, with the Irish tinker Trollope and his wife. "Dear me," said I, "did I not see you near Chepstow last summer?" "To be sure you did, and you were going to pass me without a word of notice or kindness, had I not given ye a bit of a hail." "Well," said I beg your pardon. How is it with ye?" "Very well. How is it with your honour?" "Tolerably. Where do you come from?" "From Chepstow, your honour." "And where are you going to?" "To Newport, your honour." "And I come from Newport, and am going to Chepstow. Where's Trollope and his wife?" "At Cardiff, your honour. I shall join them again to-morrow." "Have you been away long from them?" "About a week, your honour." "What have you been doing?" "Selling my needles, your honour." "Ah, you sell needles. Well, I am glad to have met you. Let me see, there's a nice little inn on the right. Won't you come in and have some refreshment?" "Thank you, your honour. I have no objection to take a glass with an old friend." "Well then, come in. You must be tired, and I shall be glad to have some conversation with you." We went into the inn, a little tidy place. On my calling, a respectable-looking old man made his appearance behind a bar. After serving my companion with a glass of peppermint, which she said she preferred to anything else, and me with a glass of ale, both of which I paid for, he retired, and we sat down on 2 old chairs beneath a window in front of the bar. "Well," said I suppose you have Irish. Here's slaint." "Slaint you to shy," said the girl, tasting her peppermint. "Well, how do you like it?" "It is very nice indeed." "That's more than I can say of the ale, which, like all the ale in these parts, is bitter. Well, what part of Ireland do you come from?" "From no part at all. I never was in Ireland in my life. I am from Scotland Road, Manchester." "Why, I thought you were Irish." "And so I am, and all the more from being born where I was. There's not such a place for Irish in all the world as Scotland Road." "Were your father and mother from Ireland?" "My mother was from Ireland. My father was Irish of Scotland Road, where they met and married." "And what did they do after they married?" "Why, they worked hard and did their best to get a livelihood for themselves and children, of which they had several besides myself, who was the eldest. My father was a bricklayer, and my mother sowed apples and oranges and other fruits according to the season, and also whiskey, which she made herself, as she well knew how. For my mother was not only a Connacht woman, but an out-and-out Connemara queen, and when only 13 had wrought with the lads who used to make the rail crater on the islands between Ochterard and Ballynahinch. As soon as I was able, I helped my mother in making and disposing of the whiskey, and in selling the fruit. As for the other children, they all died when young, of favers, of which there is always plenty in Scotland Road. About 4 years ago, that is, when I was just 15, there was a great quarrel among the workmen about wages. Some wanted more than their masters were willing to give, others were willing to take what was offered them. Those who were dissatisfied were called bricks.
Those who were not were called dungs. My father was a brick, and being a good man with his fists, was looked upon as a very proper person to fight a principal man amongst the dungs. They fought in the fields near Salford for £1 a side. My father had it all his own way for the first 3 rounds, but in the 4th received a blow under the ear from the dung. He dropped and never got up again, dying suddenly. A grand wake my father had, for which my mother furnished usquebach galore, and comfortably and decently it passed over till about 3 o'clock in the morning, when a dispute happened to arise. Not on the matter of wages, for there was not a dung amongst the Irish of Scotland Road, but as to whether the O'Keefes or O'Kellys were kings of Ireland 1,000 years ago. A general fight took place, which brought in the police, who, being soon dreadfully beaten, as we all turned upon them, went and fetched the military, with whose help they took and locked up several of the party, amongst whom were my mother and myself, till the next morning, when we were taken before the magistrates, who, after a slight scolding, set us at liberty, one of them saying that such disturbances formed part of the general funeral service. Whereupon we returned to the house, and the rest of the party joining us, we carried my father's body to the churchyard, where we buried it very decently, with many tears and groanings.
And how did your mother and you get on after your father was buried?
As well we could, your honour. We sold fruit and now and then a drop of whiskey, which we made. But this state of things did not last long, for one day my mother, seeing the dung had killed my father, she flung a large flint stone and knocked out his right eye, for doing which she was taken up and tried and sentenced to a year's imprisonment. Chiefly it was thought because she had been heard to say that she would do the dung a mischief the first time she met him. She, however, did not suffer all her sentence, for before she had been in prison 3 months she caught a disorder which carried her off. I went on selling fruit by myself whilst she was in trouble, and for some time after her death, but very lonely and melancholy. At last my uncle Turro, or as the English would call him Charles, chancing to come to Scotland Road along with his family, I was glad to accept an invitation to join them which he gave me, and with them I have been ever since, travelling about England and Wales and Scotland, helping my aunt with the children, and driving much the same trade which she has driven for 20 years past, which is not an unprofitable one.
Would you have any objection to tell me all you do?
Why, I sell needles, as I said before, and sometimes I buys things of servants, and sometimes I tells fortunes.
Do you ever do anything in the way of striopachas?
Oh no, I never do anything in that line. I would be burnt first. I wonder you should dream of such a thing.
Why, surely it is not worse than buying things of servants, who no doubt steal them from their employers, or telling fortunes, which is dealing with the devil.
Not worse. Yes, 1,000 times worse. There is nothing so very particular in doing things but striopachas. Oh dear.
It's a dreadful thing, I admit, but the other things are quite as bad. You should do none of them.
I'll take good care that I never do one, and that is striopachas. Them other things I know are not quite right, and I hope soon to have done with them. Any day I can shake them off and look people in the face, but were I once to do striopachas, I would never hold up my head.
How is it that you have such a horror of striopachas?
I got it from my mother, and she got it from hers. All Irish women have a dread of striopachas. It's the only thing that frights them. I means the wild Irish, for as for the quality women, I have heard they are no bit better than the English. Come, your honour, let's talk of something else.
You were saying now that you were thinking of leaving off fortune-telling and buying things of servants. Do you mean to depend upon your needles alone?
No, I am thinking of leaving off tramping altogether and going to the Tir na Sia.
Isn't that America?
It is, your honour. The land of the West is America.
A long way for a lone girl.
I should not be alone, your honour. I should be with my uncle Turlo and his wife.
Are they going to America?
They are, your honour. They intends leaving off business and going to America next spring.
It will cost money.
It will, your honour, but they have got money, and so have I.
Is it because business is slack that you are thinking of going to America?
Oh no, your honour. We wish to go there in order to get rid of old ways and habits, amongst which are fortune-telling and buying things of servants, which your honour was just now checking me with.
And can't you get rid of them here?
We cannot, your honour. If we stay here we must go on tramping, and it is well known that doing them things is part of tramping."
"And what would you do in America?"
"Oh, we could do plenty of things in America. Most likely we should buy a piece of land and settle down."
"How came you to see the wickedness of the tramping life?"
"By hearing a great many sermons and preachings, and having often had the Bible read to us by holy women who came to our tent."
"Of what religion do you call yourselves now?"
"I don't know, your honour. We are clean unsettled about religion. We were once Catholics and carried Saint Colman of Cloyne about with us in a box. But after hearing a sermon at a church about images, we went home, took the saint out of his box and cast him into a river."
"Oh, it will never do to belong to the Popish religion, a religion which upholds idol worship and persecutes the Bible. You should belong to the Church of England."
"Well, perhaps we should, your honour, if its ministers were not such proud, violent men. Oh, you little know how they look down upon all poor people, especially honest tramps. Once my poor Aunt Turlow's wife, who has always had stronger conviction than any of us, followed one of them home after he had been preaching, and begged him to give her God, and was told by him that she was a thief, and if she didn't take herself out of the house he would kick her out."
"Perhaps, after all," said I, "you had better join the Methodists. I should say that their ways would suit you better than those of any other denomination of Christians."
"Your honour knows nothing about them, otherwise you wouldn't talk in that manner. Their ways would never do for people who want to have done with lying and staring, and have always kept themselves clean from striopachus. Their word is not worth a rotten straw, your honour, and in every transaction which they have with people they try to cheat and overreach. Ask my uncle Turlough, who has had many dealings with them. But what is far worse, they do that which the wildest Colleen t'other side of Ugtarad would be burnt rather than do. Who can tell you more on that point than I, your honour? I have been at their chapels at nights, and have listened to their screaming prayers, and have seen what's going on outside the chapels after their services, as they call them, were over. I never saw the like going on outside Father Tobin's chapel, your honour. Your honour's Hannah asked me if I ever did anything in the way of striopachus. Now I tell ye that I was never asked to do anything in that line but by one of them folks. A great man amongst them he was, both in the way of business and prayer, for he was a commercial traveller during 6 days of the week, and a preacher on the 7th, and such a preacher. Well, one Sunday night, after he had preached a sermon an hour and a half long, which had put half a dozen women into what they call static fits, he overtook me in a dark street and wanted me to do striopachus with him. He didn't say striopachus, your honour, for he had no Irish, but he said something in English which was the same thing."
"And what did you do?"
"Why, I asked him what he meant by making fun of a poor ugly girl, for no one knows better than myself, your honour, that I am very ugly. Whereupon he told me that he was not making fun of me, for it had long been the chief wish of his heart to commit striopachus with a wild Irish papist, and that he believed if he searched the world he should find none wilder than myself."
"And what did you reply?"
"Why, I said to him, your honour, that I would tell the congregation, at which he laughed and said he wished I would, for that the congregation would say they didn't believe me, though at heart they would, and would like him all the better for it."
"Well, and what did you say then?"
"Nothing at all, your honour, but I spat in his face and went home and told my uncle Turlough, who forthwith took out a knife and began to sharp it on a whetstone, and I make no doubt would have gone and stuck the fellow like a pig, had not my poor aunt begged him not on her knees. After that we had nothing more to do with the Methodists as far as religion went."
"Did this affair occur in England or Wales?"
"In the heart of England, your honour. We have never been to the Welsh chapels, for we know little of the language."
"Well, I am glad it didn't happen in Wales, for I have rather a high opinion of the Welsh Methodist. The worthiest creature I ever knew was a Welsh Methodist. And now I must leave you and make the best of my way to Chepstow."
"Can't your honour give me God before you go?"
"I can give you £half-a-crown to help you on your way to America."
"I want no half-crowns, your honour, but if ye would give me God, I'll bless ye."
"What do you mean by giving you God?"
"Putting him in my heart by some good counsel which will guide me through life."
"The only good counsel I can give you is to keep the commandments. One of them, it seems, you have always kept." Follow the rest and you can't go very wrong.
I wish I knew them better than I do, your honour.
Can't you read?
Oh no, your honour, I can't read, neither can Turlough nor his wife.
Well, learn to read as soon as possible. When you have got to America and settled down, you will have time enough to learn to read.
Shall we be better, your honour, after we have learnt to read?
Let's hope you will.
One of the things, your honour, that have made us stumble is that some of the holy women who have come to our tent and read the Bible to us have afterwards asked my aunt and me to tell them their fortunes.
If they have, the more shame for them, for they can have no excuse. Well, whether you learn to read or not, still eschew striopachas. Don't steal, don't deceive, and worship God in spirit, not in image. That's the best counsel I can give you.
And very good counsel it is, your honour, and I will try to follow it. And now, your honour, let us go our two ways.
We placed our glasses upon the bar and went out. In the middle of the road we shook hands and parted, she going towards Newport and I towards Chepstow. After walking a few yards I turned round and looked after her. There she was in the damp lowering afternoon, wending her way slowly through mud and puddle, her upper form huddled in the rough frieze mantle, and her coarse legs bare to the top of the calves. Surely, said I to myself, there never was an object less promising in appearance. Who would think that there could be all the good sense and proper feeling in that uncouth girl which there really is? End of chapter 108. Chapter 109 of Wild Wales. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Steve Gough. Wild Wales by George Borrow. Chapter 109. I passed through Caerfili, once an important Roman station, and for a long time after the departure of the Romans a celebrated British city, now a poor desolate place consisting of a few old-fashioned houses and a strange-looking dilapidated church. No Welsh is spoken at Caerfili, nor to the east of it, nor indeed for 2 or 3 miles before you reach it from the west. The country between it and Chepstow, from which it is distant about 4 miles, is delightfully green but somewhat tame. Chepstow stands on the lower part of a hill, near to where the beautiful Wye joins the noble Severn. The British name of the place is Aber-Wye, or the disemboguement of the Wye. The Saxons gave it the name of Chepstow, which in their language signifies a place where a market is held, because even in the time of the Britons it was the site of a great cheap or market. After the Norman conquest it became the property of De Clare, one of William's followers, who built near it an enormous castle, which enjoyed considerable celebrity during several centuries from having been the birthplace of Strongbow, the conqueror of Ireland, but which is at present chiefly illustrious from the mention which is made of it in one of the most stirring lyrics of modern times, a piece by Walter Scott called Norman Horseshoe, commemorative of an expedition made by a De Clare of Chepstow with the view of insulting with the print of his courser's shoe the green meads of Glamorgan, and which commences thus: Red glows the forge. I went to the principal inn, where I engaged a private room and ordered the best dinner which the people could provide. Then, leaving my satchel behind me, I went to the castle, amongst the ruins of which I groped and wandered for nearly an hour, occasionally repeating verses of the Norman Horseshoe. I then went to the Wye and drank of the waters at its mouth, even as some time before I had drunk of the waters at its source. Then, returning to my inn, I got my dinner, after which I called for a bottle of port, and placing my feet against the sides of the grate, I passed my time drinking wine and singing Welsh songs till 10 o'clock at night, when I paid my reckoning, amounting to something considerable. Then, shouldering my satchel, I proceeded to the railroad station, where I purchased a first-class ticket, and ensconcing myself in a comfortable carriage, was soon on the way to London, where I arrived at about 4 o'clock in the morning, having had during the whole of my journey a most uproarious set of neighbours, a few carriages behind me, namely some 150 Napier's tars returning from their expedition to the Baltic. End of chapter 109. and End of Wild Wales by George Borrow. Recorded by Steve Gough in Wales and London, commencing in the summer of 2013, finishing in the summer of 2015.